Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Mark and I, we're going to go back and forth talking about epilepsy and the importance of self-care. I recognize a lot of you from Uplift and other programs, and it's always nice to see your smiling faces, especially in this current virtual world. So, Mark, why don't we get started? Go for it.
Thanks, Leigh, and hi, everybody. Appreciate your time tonight. We know everyone kind of has busy schedules, so taking an hour to be with us means a lot. So we wanted to just kind of dive in and acknowledge where our world is at the moment. I mean, everyone has been impacted by the pandemic, and it's become our new reality. And I've heard people, talk about it as a marathon. However, it's a marathon that we don't really know where the end is. We just have to kind of keep going. And we know that any type of change can be extremely stressful. And I've heard people say, if you're living with epilepsy, you've kind of already learned how to live with this condition that could strike at any time and have significant impact on you, and learning to live kind of within that feeling of just out of control or, helplessness at times when it comes to a medical condition is something that people living with epilepsy, which I was diagnosed in 1996, to some extent have experienced in different ways. However, there is anxiety from contracting COVID, as well as anxiety from all these other pieces of it, like the economic fallout and health disparities and all that are rippling out. And so one of the best things that we can do, and I imagine you've heard this before, is to boost our immunity so we're not susceptible to being diagnosed or contracting COVID-19. The piece, though, that doesn't get talked about enough is that our mental health and our physical health are absolutely tied together. And my day job, I'm with Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield in their behavioral health division, and I can tell you that large companies spend about 4% of their total kind of health insurance spend on behavioral health issues, just 4%. However, the members within that 4% make up 40% of the medical amount spent. So think about that. 40% of all the medical dollars spent is by this small group of people who also have a behavioral health diagnosis. And so that, for me, just highlights how important the two are, because if you have a behavioral health issue going on, more than likely you have physical health issues going on. And for someone who's already living with epilepsy, that becomes even trickier. So we need to always appreciate that our physical and mental health are completely tied together, and look at it more as all the different determinants of health, whether it be our physical health or our mental health or our financial health or our access to food in our neighborhoods. All those things play into the immunity, the health of our beings that we need to just keep in mind, because it's even more vital during this pandemic time that we don't really know when it's going to end. Leigh, next slide, please. So we wanted to talk about anxiety and depression specifically. Anxiety disorder affects 40 million Americans, almost 18% of our population. It's something that has continued to increase, as you can imagine, during the pandemic. Our behavioral health team at Anthem has seen a significant increase in not only calls, but also the acuity of callers. And a lot of it is around anxiety. And then depression is something that has always impacted Americans, and that's continuing to increase. In fact, disability numbers show that depression is the #1 reason why people take disability from companies. And so I think that's pretty incredible that it beats out all the other physical conditions or injuries that might occur on a job, and depression is the leading cause there. However, it's about, you see with depression, it's 6 to 7% of the population, but within the epilepsy community, I've seen statistics anywhere from 20 to 50% of the population of people living with epilepsy can be diagnosed with depression and anxiety. So there is a much larger prevalence of it within our community. And then also those other comorbidities that could be there are the sleep disorders or cognitive impairments, both, of course, significantly impacting our seizures and our seizure frequencies. So this is something to keep in mind because, again, our mental health impacts our physical health. And when we're feeling these negative emotions, whether anxiousness or that depression, it will play out in our physical health, either because of our epilepsy or through other means. And the seizure control can influence the severity of it. I mean, I'm someone who I'm extremely fortunate that years ago, I was able to find the right combination of medication as well as kind of lifestyle factors that I was able to implement to find a good balance. And so my frequency isn't as much as other people. And so I know that helps, that can impact the severity. I'm not gonna lie, there are times where I do feel down. I do feel anxious. This pandemic threw me for a loop. I had some big plans career-wise that got put on hold, and yeah, it stunk. I'm not gonna lie. I wouldn't say I was fully depressed, but there were a few weeks where it was hard adjusting to the fact that everything I'd been planning for wasn't going to happen. And so I think we need to be aware of that, because during that time, I became more conscious of how I was feeling. If I got tired, I would go lay down sooner because I knew that those feelings could impact my seizure control and my seizure frequency. So Leigh, next slide, please. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what to look for. So we're going to start with depression. I imagine you've seen this before, but we want to go through it again because this is something that if you're in the middle of it, it might not be as easy to identify. And sometimes it might take someone else outside of you pointing it out. And so it's good for you to know about yourself for that awareness, but also when you're looking at other people, you can see these persistent feelings of sadness or just emptiness. And when we talk about major depressive disorder, this usually means that these symptoms, or at least 5 of them, are going on for the past 2 weeks, the majority of the day. And so this plays out, and maybe you don't want to go do the things that you normally enjoy doing, even though you know they're a stress reducer, something that can help you. You just don't feel like you have the energy to do that. Making decisions even becomes more complicated because our mind is kind of taking that tunnel vision, and we can't see anything else except the difficulty that we're in the moment. And so we need to remember that and kind of take those blinders off and realize that just because we can't think of a solution to what's going on doesn't mean that there isn't one. We can't give up. We need to remind ourselves that if we're feeling down, we need to take steps to address it. And paying attention to things like our sleep patterns and our eating patterns are important. They're ways our body is telling us that something is going on, either we're feeling anxious or we're feeling down. And it can go both ways. Maybe you're sleeping more, or maybe you're sleeping less. And again, eating more, or eating less. But it's the change that you need to pay attention to, really. And then as we go down here, if then the more severe cases, if someone is thinking about harming themselves, that needs to be taken seriously. That can't be a, well, you know, they didn't seem that serious, or letting it slide. That's something that we really need to engage in and tell people it's okay to talk about these things. And it is becoming more okay in our society, which is great. However, we're not there yet. There's a long way to go in that regard, but it takes other individuals being courageous enough to dive into that area. Hey, I'm concerned about you. You've made some comments. If you are going to talk to someone, say the actual words. Are you thinking of taking your own life? Make them answer that question, not in a confronting way, but in a I'm concerned about you way. These things don't go away on their own. It requires someone to encourage them to seek support and to continually push them to do that. So keep all this in mind when it comes to you, as well as when you're identifying symptoms in other people. Leigh, next slide, please. So for anxiety, we'll go through these quickly here, that anxiousness, that nervousness. I notice I'm irritable. I have kind of that short fuse. So certain days, we have a 2-year-old. So some days he's amazing, some days not so much. But I will notice in the moments where I'm stressed, where I'm anxious, I won't respond like I want to because I have a knee-jerk reaction and I don't stop and breathe and think about how I want to show up in that moment. And that goes back to that anxiety. And when we are anxious, it comes out in physical ways, just like the depression. But with anxiety, it's an increased heart rate. It's breathing more shallow. And these are things that we might not even realize we're doing. I know times where in my day, I'll have to stop and just realize I need to take a deep breath because something has made me anxious, and I've just begun taking those more shallow breaths, and that's not getting as much air to my brain. And again, that tunnel vision is happening, and I'm starting to struggle making decisions. So we need to realize that our emotions are having a physical impact on our body, which again is impacting our cognition, our mental state, our emotions. So if any of this is going on, we need to make sure that we're having that awareness about ourselves, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but we also know what to do about it and how it impacts our epilepsy. So Leigh, I think this next slide is yours.
Great, thanks, Mark. So as Mark said, he talked about anxiety and depression, and this is a little repetitive right here. He mentioned earlier, so up to 50% of those living with epilepsy are diagnosed with anxiety and or depression. There's different studies done on that. You guys can read through the facts here, but basically the main point we want to get across is that a lot of people with epilepsy and without epilepsy have anxiety and depression as well, and that's okay. Especially right now, we're in a very interesting time, a time where we don't know what to expect, a time where for those who are type A personalities like myself, where I want to plan every minute of every day, that's not always realistic in this time and place, and that's okay. So at the bottom here, when it says, remember, if you're finding yourself feeling anxious or depressed, don't feel ashamed of it. It's going on all the time. It's going on around you, and not just this year. That is also for certain types of epilepsy. I actually find this really fascinating. I don't have the actual the article. I want to find this, but I have heard that depression and anxiety can be due to the types of seizures you have or what part of your brain is impacted. So that's always fascinating as well. But in this time, and when you have these days, you're not alone. And just know that you can always talk to others. That's a good step. I've noticed I listen to the radio a lot when I'm in the car, and I hear recently I've been hearing a lot. I can't remember the exact text, but it says like let's talk colorado.org or something like that. And it's talking about feel free to talk about how you're feeling. Don't be ashamed to reach out because we're all in this together. And that's what the foundation is here for. That's what these groups are here for. And that's life. So a little more about the combination of stress, depression, and anxiety. Stress can have a lot of impacts on the body. A few here: shortness of breath, rapid heart rate, fatigue, headaches, and seizures. Some of you may know that stress is actually one of the most common triggers for seizures. I have epilepsy as well. That's one of the biggest ones for me. So during stressful times, we need to pay attention to that, especially for those of us who experience seizures, and think of ways, how can I manage my lifestyle and manage my day and reduce stress? And how can we pay more attention to that? Pay more attention to our bodies when I am feeling stressed. Think, okay, can I take a step back? What am I doing? What caused this stress?
Yeah.
Let's take a break for a second.
Nope.
And that's okay. Also, everyone copes with stress differently. So you have to find what works for you. For me, I like to go outside. I need to talk to someone or get some fresh air or maybe eat ice cream, and then I'll be happy in 10 minutes. Whatever works for you, that's great. And take some time to think about that, especially during these crazy times right now. Mark, go for it.
Thanks, Leigh. Going back to our crazy times, as Leigh mentioned, there's also this pandemic fatigue, and I imagine everyone's kind of seen this with people have become so focused on it, which is required. You know, this is a global pandemic, but our focus on it has created this exhaustion of just what's the next thing that's going to happen here. And then we know, there's an election coming up next week, and the politics that have surrounded this pandemic. All of this is just adding to our stress levels, this feeling that not only are we out of control, our world is to some extent out of control. And it does create that stress. And so because of that, like Leigh mentioned, we need to figure out what's going to work from us for a stress reliever. And I think there are two pieces to this. One, what do you do on an ongoing basis to keep that stress level low? I do, Leigh mentioned kind of what she does for an ongoing thing. What I do is I get on my bike, whether it's my spin bike or my regular bike. I just need to be able to have that activity to enjoy something and push myself a little bit more. So that's a key piece. Walking my dogs once or twice a day is another key piece. There are things that I have routinely throughout my week to keep it low. But then I also have things that I can do right in the moment. So if I feel that stress level spike, if I'm reading an article about the pandemic or what's going to happen next, and I start feeling anxious, I have what I can do right then. And I actually I stop, I tell myself to stop, like I'm talking to myself, stop, breathe, think. Those are kind of my three phrases to really just kind of realign my thoughts, to get myself back on track, and to realize that I was spiraling a little bit, but I can control my thoughts and I can bring them back. And so those are just a few things to consider in terms of how do you keep that stress level low? How do you get through this in a calm way? Some other ideas to consider, some mindfulness meditations. Project UPLIFT, which I know Leigh will be talking about, teaches you a number of different ways to do this. There are also a number of apps out there. You've probably heard of Calm or Headspace that can walk you through it. But just helping, the meditation, of course, is important, but learning more about mindfulness is crucial too, because of the awareness aspect. We need to become aware of what's happening within us to make sure that we know how to respond to it properly. So these are just a few things. I mean, Leigh, of course, if you have anything to add, please do. But the whole point of this is to start generating ideas for people, not saying this is what you need to do to start feeling less stress or anything like that, but rather here are some ideas to consider, but tailor that to your current situation as well as what actually works for you.
And thank you, Mark. And one other thing to add, when Mark and I were preparing this presentation, the bullet where it says anxiety about COVID-19 versus anxiety towards current lack of social opportunities, we were talking about that, and I've noticed that a lot lately. That like Mark mentioned, we're in a political climate. A lot of people don't agree with each other. And then I've also noticed it could be due to COVID, and they say, oh, stay back, don't touch me. But then at the same time, others are saying, well, I don't have enough contact with people, and I'm lonely, and I don't have anyone to talk to. And I've also noticed personally as well, when I'm out on the street and everyone has their masks on, people have said, well, no one smiles at each other, no one talks to me anymore, and they just stay away. And it's because of COVID. A lot of people want to keep their distance and be safe, and that's absolutely fine. But I'm noticing that we get mixed messages from each other, and that's something to keep in mind as well. And it kind of goes back to the simplicity, kind of goes back to when we were in second grade and the teacher says, okay, everyone be nice to each other. And what are you going to say that's nice to your friend today? What did your classmate do for you that was nice? What made you happy? And it's the simple things when we get frustrated like this, and when we are feeling alone, especially in this time, call up someone who you haven't called in a while. And that may just be the smallest thing to make their day, and vice versa. So just something to keep in mind. Mark, take the lead.
Thanks, Leigh. And this is what we were talking about, or what I've kind of mentioned a few times now, is around the awareness, because that's really the first step. We need to gain that self-awareness. Without that, we don't know what to fix. It's like taking an engine apart without fully diagnosing what the problem is first. You're going to spend a lot of time just wasting effort, where if you can become aware of how you're feeling, and from there even taking a step further and analyzing what's going on that's causing me to feel this way. Again, I mentioned how during my workday I'll notice myself breathing more shallow, and another thing is I'll tense my shoulders. And so when I notice that, I might be like, oh, actually I've been doing this for a couple minutes now, and that's when I pause. Okay, what's going on that made me kind of begin feeling more tense, and then be able to backtrack it to, okay, this thought really threw me for a loop. What can I do to change my response to it? So I'm doing some kind of coaching and counseling with myself, but it starts with being aware of what's going on. And that's where the mindfulness comes in terms of being able to become aware of it without judging it. Instead of saying, gosh, Mark, stop being anxious. There's no reason to be anxious about this thing, whatever it is. That's not helping. You're just kind of belittling yourself. And so it needs to be an awareness without judgment. Just that's interesting. I didn't realize I felt that way about this subject, or that thought had never occurred to me before. And you can choose whether you want to engage with that thought or that feeling, or move away from it. So it starts with being more aware. And it's easy to talk about. Right now is the easy part. It's going out and being able to do this, to apply it. And I would say start in those kind of more relaxed moments where you can just pay attention to, oh, okay, this is what calmness feels like. This is what relaxed feels like for me. And then once you understand that relaxed state, look for the changes from it. Look for the changes from baseline. That's what tells you when you're moving in a certain direction, and pay attention to what just happened that's causing you to go that way. You can see some of the things here at the bottom here. Journaling, that's a great way to pay attention to what's going on for you. I know different people do it differently. Some people, if they're experiencing a negative emotion, they might grab their journal right then and kind of write out what's going on. Some people do it at the end of their day, just write through the different things they remember and what it elicited for them. But the whole point is being able to reflect and figure out, how was I feeling during that moment? What was it that caused me to feel that way? Is there a different way I want to respond in the future? Those are the things that are happening when someone's reflecting on those moments, or that should be happening. And then I know I've mentioned the meditation, but also cognitive behavioral therapy techniques have been shown to be extremely effective, especially with people living with epilepsy, because so often, at least for me, when I was first diagnosed and still trying to really get under control, my thoughts just ran wild. And so I really had to use those cognitive behavioral techniques to get them under control. And there's a number of different ways to do that, on a later session or in Project UPLIFT, you can learn more about. But bottom line, it's being able to challenge our thoughts in a constructive way. So it's kind of that checking them, challenging, and changing them to make sure that our thoughts are helping us move in a positive direction, and not just another kind of weight around us that we're dragging along on this journey that is already tough enough when you're living with epilepsy or caring about someone living with epilepsy. So Leigh, I think it's your turn again.
Thanks, Mark. So now, sorry, I'm in my dad's office. Okay. Now we are going to talk about self-management, and then we're going to go on to talk about the perspective of a caregiver, because both are really important roles. To start off with, a lot of you are adults living with epilepsy, and you probably hear all the time, okay, you need to take care of yourself. You need to take care of yourself, figure out your seizures, then you'll be fine. Sometimes it's easier said than done. And as Mark and I said, both of us live with epilepsy as well. Everyone is controlled differently, and everyone's epilepsy affects them differently. But these 3 steps can be a start to self-management in epilepsy. The first one is treatment management, because that's what everyone goes for. When you're newly diagnosed, it's brand new, it's scary. You may be having different types of seizures. You may have never heard of a seizure, and the doctors are saying, oh, try this, okay, write this down, and it's just a huge blur all at once, and that's really intimidating. Little by little, you will begin to learn more about your seizure types. You will begin to understand, okay, this is the difference between a generic medication and a brand medication, and this is why I feel differently when I don't sleep enough or when I miss my medication. Treatment management is really important. All that includes is following up with your medical appointments, communicating with your doctor, paying attention to yourself, keeping track of how often you feel a certain way. That's number one, because that is managing your seizures. And that adds to emotional management as well, because then you'll be proud of yourself. Hey, I'm paying attention. I'm on top of things. I've written this down. We're good to go. That's number one. Seizure management is number two, where you're recognizing and avoiding the triggers. So treatment, you're paying attention, you're learning about different treatment types, but the seizures might not necessarily be controlled, and that's okay. Seizure management, you're learning your body. What causes my seizures? Oh, my friend has these types of seizures and they're fine and they can drink alcohol, and so I can too. Possibly not, and that's okay. But we just need to learn our bodies. Tracking your seizures. A lot of people nowadays track their seizures on their phone. I'm really old fashioned. I still have a seizure calendar that my doctor gave me from 2008 or something, and I made a bunch of copies, and I write down my seizure types, and okay, I had 3 of these today, I had an aura, I didn't have an aura, whatever works for you. But that's also going to give you a sense of self-accomplishment when you're able to track your seizures and recognize your triggers as well, because it's another form of independence and learning your body. Third, lifestyle management. Getting enough sleep is a biggie for a lot of people with seizures. Reducing stress. As we mentioned, stress and anxiety are very common causes and triggers for seizures. So all 3 of these things are part of self-management. And you may think, oh, I can do that. It's pretty simple, but don't rush yourself. It's okay. Pay attention to this today. Maybe, okay, in the next few weeks, I'm going to focus on treatment management. And then, oh, I'll pay attention since I've been talking to my doctor. Have I been keeping track of my seizures? Oh, in the meantime, how is my stress level? Have I been getting enough sleep? And then before you know it, you'll be doing all 3 at once, and it'll be easy as pie. But at first, give yourself a little time. Self-care, continuing with that, pretty much the same thing. Work with your medical team, few things that Mark mentioned, journaling, keeping track of seizure frequency, lifestyle choices, pay attention to your diet, avoid your triggers. One thing with diets, you've probably heard the keto diet is really common for people with epilepsy, the modified Atkins diet, a bunch of other ones. I hear random things all the time. Some people have told me, oh, if you have epilepsy, you can't eat chocolate. That's going to be a trigger for you. Like, I love chocolate. Why not? And again, you have to go with how you're affected. It's good to listen as well and listen to your doctor, but not everyone is impacted by the same things. So know your body. Physical activity is really good for people with epilepsy. Mark mentioned that he likes to ride bikes. That's a big one for me. I walk like 6 to 10 miles a day sometimes. It's my fresh air, it's my physical activity, and it helps me reduce my auras when those are taking place. So again, whatever works for you. Now, I'd like to focus on those of you who are caregivers, because you have an extremely important role as well. And a lot of people say, oh, you're amazing, and then they forget what you do every day and just kind of don't talk to you anymore, and forget that you have a lot of pressure as well. And caregivers, I admire you because you love the person with epilepsy and you do a lot for them, but you need self-management as well, and you deserve self-care. So a lot of the same things go for you guys. Exercising, eating healthy, taking care of your own health, make sure you get some sleep, recognize when you're stressed, join a support group, take some me time for yourself. When Mark mentioned CBT and like join a support group, one program that we do have at the foundation is the Preferred Provider Network, where we do have therapists who are trained on how to work with people who have epilepsy and non-epileptic seizures. And we have a financial aid component in that program. And that program is for caregivers and family members as well, because you deserve all of the support that you're giving someone else. If any of you are caregivers and you ever want to talk, feel free to reach out, because we love you guys. And here, talking about ways to boost happiness. So we've been talking about anxiety and stress and depression and all of the negative things that can sometimes impact someone's life and increase seizures. But now, how do we change that? So it says start now. Maybe it's the end of the day. You can say, okay, I'm going to start tomorrow. This is my new thing. Something I often talk about, I'm skipping down to the middle a little bit where it says list 3 great things from your day. But personally, I don't have the best memory, and so I keep a calendar every day, partly from my memory because I know myself, but the things that I write down in that calendar, I write 2 things down that I did that day. I've been doing this for about 4 years now. I write 2 positive things that happened that day. If it was a really bad day, okay, I'll write what happened, because possibly if I have a seizure the next day, maybe it was from the stress. I try to keep it positive because there are good things that happen every day. And I also put a check mark on whether or not I forgot my medication. And these are good ways to pay attention, again, to your triggers and keep track of your seizures. But also, I can't remember what I did a week ago. I look back at my calendar like, wow, I've actually done a ton this week despite this crazy time. I'm really lucky to know all of these people. So that's just a simple way to do that. Connecting with others around you, writing an email to thank someone, simple things like that. Mark, I will pass it on to you.
Well, thank you. And the reason focusing on boosting our happiness is so important is because we often put stipulations on our happiness. If I can just get to X, then I will be happier. If I can just get my seizures under control or reduced, then life will be easier and I'll be happier. That could absolutely be true. Life could absolutely be easier, but you can choose to be happy even before then. It, again, is how you approach the world. No one's forcing you to feel a certain way. And you're right, living with epilepsy, it is more difficult than the general population, but unfortunately, it kind of goes back to that whole, no one ever said life was going to be fair. It's just how do we want to respond to it? And so, again, before you start feeling that way, knowing what you're going to do to boost your happiness is important. And so we talked about exercise already. All types of research shows that it does boost your mood and happiness levels, kind of that endorphin from the runner's high. It's the same thing. It creates happiness hormones in you, basically. But the other 2 here, commit conscious acts of kindness. Being able to step outside of yourself and focus on someone else leaves a lasting impression, not only on them, but on you. And you are able to recall those moments up to a week later, and thinking about them can just boost your mood. And it's not a, hey, look how awesome I was, but more of just that felt good to help someone else. It felt good to stop and put my efforts into making someone else's life better. And this is one of the things that I realized when when my seizures were out of control, that helping others was a key habit I needed to get into. It was something that needed to become part of my happiness hygiene plan on a daily basis, or at least weekly basis. How am I giving back? How am I putting something greater than myself, making that a priority in my life? Because it is crucial, not only because I feel like I can help people in different ways, but it also helps me. I truly notice a difference in myself when I don't have those opportunities to help other people. And then also exercising a signature strength, finding ways to continue to push yourself by using what you know to be your strengths provides that sense of accomplishment that can really boost our mood as well. And for me, Leigh was talking about some for triggers earlier. For me, stress is definitely one of my triggers, and specifically stress with relationships. If I'm struggling in one of my relationships, it eats at me. And so because of that, I started focusing on communication. I ended up going to graduate school and getting a master's degree in counseling psychology, which is basically just learning how to talk to people and doing it in an efficient way. And part of that is because I realized my relationships and when I'm struggling with one of them really impacts me. But the other thing too is that I've learned that I can't work as long or as hard as some of my other colleagues. And so what I've chosen to do is stop and say, what are those skills that other people don't enjoy doing that if I learn to do better than them, I might not have to work as long as them? And for me, again, communicating is one of them. And so in my job a lot, I get asked to do speaking engagements because I've honed that skill. And I find new ways to use it in terms of not only doing trainings like this, but I now do a podcast for my company that I really enjoy, and I write blog articles. I've found different ways to use that skill of communication, continue to exercise it, and that provides me fulfillment and happiness. So it's extremely important to find those signature strengths of yours, find ways to exercise them. If it's helping other people, even better. Leigh, next slide. So diving into the benefits of helping people, it makes us happy, bottom line. It's almost a selfish act. It's also contagious. And here's a good example. I'm not talking about, medically, physically contagious, but just the mindset. And I was at Starbucks the other day, driving through, and I pulled up to the window and the lady said, "Oh, actually the car in front of you bought your coffee today." Wow, that's really nice. I would like to do that as well for the car behind me. So I immediately wanted to be part of it. It wasn't something that normally we're like, oh no, never mind. We get drawn into that. We want to be part of it. Funny enough, there were 4 people in the car behind me, so I ended up paying like $20 for my 1 cup of coffee, but bottom line, I wanted to be part of it. And I told my coworker about it, and she actually ended up doing it later that day as well. And her daughter was in the back of the car, and her daughter asked what she was doing, and she explained this was just a way that she wanted to help somebody else and just give good back to the world. And her daughter later that night, they were walking into school, and she saw some trash, and she ran and picked it up and put it in the trash. And she said, "See, Mommy, I'm helping other people too." And it was just this cycle, seeing how it all started with some stranger purchasing me a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So it is contagious. And you can see here on the screen, there are physical benefits to it as well. It can decrease blood pressure. It can help with chronic pain. It can help you live longer. And some research says it's a combination, because when you're volunteering, you're usually physically active, but you're also more socially engaged. So there are a number of different reasons, but bottom line, when they researched a large group of people, I think like 2,000 plus people, the individuals who volunteered on average 6 hours a week reported higher levels of happiness just across the board. And so there is a connection there. And some have even tied it into a neurochemical response, a kind of a reward receptor response in our brain that we get when we help other people. So even at that neurochemical level, it's changing us. And it helps you meet others, develop new relationships. I know EFCO has a number of opportunities right now. Leigh mentioned calling other people. I think that's a great way to connect. There's the peer support group, being able to reach out to others living with epilepsy, especially if they're homebound, even before the pandemic. Especially this didn't make it any easier for anybody. So finding ways to volunteer with EFCO, even in this virtual world, will of course help them, but there is real benefit to you as well. And so it truly is something that I need as part of my lifestyle plan to keep my seizures under control. And I've been with the foundation now since 2014, mainly helping with mental health needs and Project UPLIFT. But that's part of something that I need, and I feel good about what we're able to provide to the epilepsy community. So just my thoughts, and I think I'm handing it back to Leigh to kind of bring us home.
Thanks, Mark. And yeah, the final, almost the last slide. With all of that said, we do have a program called Project UPLIFT. It will start in a few weeks on November 17th. I believe a few of you on this call have participated before. Basically, it's an 8-week educational group. It's for adults 18 and older who live with epilepsy and have feelings of depression or anxiety. It's all by phone. We have switched it up recently. We actually have been doing it via Zoom like this, so we can see each other in the beginning, and then we go over kind of the booklet together, and then at the end we will see each other again. But it's a really good program because it lays out different ways to practice mindfulness, different techniques, and relaxation techniques as well during your daily routine. If you are interested, it will take place until, I think it's January 5th, whatever that Tuesday is in January. Oh, right in front of me. Yes, January 5th. And you can contact me if you are interested. It will be from 3 to 4 every Tuesday. And with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening.